India and later as the Managing Director of Procter & Gamble Worldwide. He's also the author of seminal works such as India Unbound, The Difficulty of Being Good, and The Riddle of Desire, where economics, ethics and civilizations intersect. Joining him will be Biju Paul Abraham, Professor in Public Policy and Management Group at IIM Calcutta. A former Dean Academic at IIM Calcutta, his work spans global political economy, governance and public policy. He's the author of BRICS, The Quest for Inclusive Growth, The Intelligent Person's Guide to Good Governance, and Good Governance, Democratic Societies as well as Globalization. He will be in conversation with Ambarish Dasgupta. The session will reflect on India's journey, where we have come so far, where we stand today, and what are the choices that will define us.
Hello.
Hello. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I thought an intellectual discussion around business, economics, philosophy in the most argumentative part of the country and claim to be the most intellectual part of the country will be having on the Sunday the hall filled up. But possibly our argumentative nature is declining, or maybe we are getting more certain about things and not very confused anymore, not so filled up today. This session, basically India in the past, present and tomorrow. I mean, of course, India has a philosophical history of many thousands years, 75 years of history of a modern constitution, and maybe 30 years of history and more to come in the future of a modern economy. So we have every components of that in our present economy. And we have two gentlemen with me. And of course, it's a travesty, both through the audience appetite of listening to them and to their knowledge, that we are confining them within 45 minutes, because the audience possibly would love to hear each one of them for 45 hours, and that the knowledge that they have. Now I have with me Mr. Gurcharan Das. If you see the Mr. Gurcharan Das or read his books, his main philosophy is society much above the state, morality, pluralism, not an institution controlling everything, and of course his own work on the trajectories of the Indian economy so shows what is to be learned from the past. And Professor Abraham is more on institution, more on process, lesser on speed, lesser on sloganing. So there could be a nuanced disagreement, but of course not any confrontation. And so it will be an interesting thing to see how they take it forward. The broad 4-5 areas I thought I will be requesting them to touch upon in sequence. One is of course the India's economic trajectory, where Mr. Dash has a lot to say. The geopolitical order, disorder, and a country's strategic autonomy, with reference to India possibly, where Professor Abraham will have.
2026, take notes. Manifesting. For my little Miss Sunshine, tickles and giggles. Also want to be a biker chick this time. And year 2026, only love for my people and myself. To manifest my best life, nature's cosmic energy.
Now mine, natural diamond intention pendants.
A resurgent India is racing towards the Viksit Bharat goal, braving global economic headwinds.
Bulletproofing our economy from these uncertainties are Bharat's homegrown businesses.
Powered by tech-led innovation, Indian entrepreneurs are truly scaling up, riding the next wave of disruption with AI and cloud to break into the big global league. TV9 Network in association with SAP presents Visionaries of Viksit Bharat, a series celebrating inspirational business leaders shaping tomorrow. Watch them take an iconic leap at Visionaries of Viksit Bharat conclaves. Exclusively on News 9.
We had today actually betrayed our past. Yes, giving lip service to the idea of sone ki chidiya, etc., without having a clue about what it meant. But the reality today is that what Mr. Trump called us the king of tariffs. And that's an insult. Tariffs are things that infant economies, that protection they build. 80 years later, to be called the king of tariffs is an insult. And I'm glad he's reminded us of this, and hopefully something is going to be done about that. But so, began with the idea of exploring the past, and fortunately had some connection with Sanskrit past as well. And just as an example, the Arthashastra is a very simple definition of Raj Dharma is Shatabhaga. The king is told that you don't own the land, you have a share of the produce as long as you invest in what we today would call infrastructure. And he's told that your Shatabhaga means 1/6. That means 15%. So there is a just tax rate of 15%, the tax rate of Singapore. And somebody should have told this to Indira Gandhi when our tax rate went up to 97.5%. And so this is what I mean about the betrayal of the past, because after 1950, we closed our economy on the fear of the East India Company, and we still haven't got over that fear. And frankly, that explains today why we have less than 2% share of the global trade, manufactured product trade, and why we still have not created an industrial revolution. But let me take a minute to give you a sense of our past. There was a volcano that hit what is today the Deccan Plateau. That volcano led to lava covering 500,000 square miles. That lava over time hardened to create black rock. The black rock eroded and became black soil. And it was the genius of the Indian farmer who created from that black soil white gold. And what is white gold? Cotton. And therefore, throughout our history, India was identified with cotton. And in 78 AD, Pliny, the Roman senator, gets on the Senate stage and he tells the Romans, stop wearing those togas, stop your wives from cooking with Indian spices or wearing Indian perfumes. Rome is losing 65%, 2/3 of its bullion to India, or sell something to Indians. At that time, one ship was arriving at a South Indian port from Rome every day. But to jump, that trade surplus continued right through to the Industrial Revolution, right through. And in fact, habits in the world changed. Europeans discovered fine muslin, Dhaka muslin. And what was the result? They started wearing underwear. Because with their coarse cotton and wool, they couldn't wear underwear. And it started with the aristocracy, moved down to the middle classes in the 19th, 20th century. And wearing underwear is a mass habit today. And whether it's the Tata turban, which was called Hindavi, again from Indian cotton. My point is, there are lots of wonderful stories I can tell you. Today, I'll just tell you one last story. We have wonderful books on the Marwadis, the Sindhis, the Kachis, and the Parsis, and all these families as well. But the one story I want to tell you is from one of the volumes called The Mouse Merchant. It's a story of a startup. And since we are today in a world, the age of startups, I think it's appropriate, and I'll take 2 minutes. It's a boy who becomes 17 years old. His mother tells him, "Son, I've educated you now." His father died long ago. And she says, "You're not going to do what I do." She cleans homes. She cleans homes for other people. And she says, "Over there lives the richest man in town. He's a kind man. Go and ask him for advice on what you should do." So the boy dutifully shows up at the great man's house. And while he's waiting for the man to come out, he sees a dead mouse in the courtyard. And he asks when the great man comes out, he asks him, "What can I do for you?" And the boy says, "Can I have the dead mouse?" And the man laughs and he says, "You're doing me a favor?" "Of course, but people come to me for loans, for a job. Can I help you?" The boy says, "No, that's fine." And he takes the dead mouse. He knows a widow who lives in the neighborhood. She has a cat. He sells the dead mouse as cat food to the widow, and the few paisa she gives him, he goes to the bazaar, he buys chana chor garam. He makes little packets of that, and with a jug of water, a ghada of pani, he goes into the town square and he waits. And in the afternoon, he knows loggers come from the forest bearing logs of wood on their heads. They put their logs down to rest in the afternoon, and he offers each one water and a snack. And since nobody has ever done this to them before, and they have no money, they each give him a log of wood. And he repeats this over 3 months. Each sells a log, buys more, snack, etc. But then the monsoon comes. The logging in the forest stops. The price in the timber market starts climbing. He has a house full of logs at the time, and he starts unloading his logs. And by the end of the season, he has made enough money to buy a shop in the timber market. And he sets himself up as a timber merchant. And from the next season, he has one competitive advantage. His suppliers know him. They love him. And they bring their best supply to him first. Anyway, he prospers as a timber merchant. But after a couple of years, he says that there's greater margin to be made in actually converting that wood, and since they live near a shipyard, into ships. And so he finds a retired master carpenter, shipbuilder, makes him his partner, and soon he's in the shipbuilding. He has a subsidiary, shipbuilding business. After a couple of more years, he finds actually there's even higher margin in shipping passengers and cargo. And so he finds a retired captain and makes him, and I'm just finishing the story. My point is that also succeeds, and by 25, he has become the richest man in town, and he goes to a jeweler and asks him to make him a gold mouse. And he takes that gold mouse to that rich man where he got the dead mouse from, and he presents the gold mouse to him, and he says, in today's language, this is your return on venture capital investment, which you made with the dead mouse. And the man hears this story, and he's so happy, he gives his daughter in marriage to this boy, and they live happily ever after. Now, that's the story of a startup.
Very nice.
So what I'm trying to say is that we, for the first 40 years after independence, we could not have had a startup during License Raj. There was no possibility, and there were no startups. And so we have learned the long lessons from our history. I could keep entertaining you with lots of stories, but thank you for your patience.
I know, and that's why I said that even sitting with you for 45 hours may not be doing a justice to the stories which you have. But I take a point in which you have all throughout in your books also, you have maintained that the liberation of the individual energy or the creativity or the societal energy, rather than having a lot of institutional gripping, or the thing is actually prospers the economy much more, as an example that you gave right now through that boy. But coming to Biju, I mean, there are two aspects of your writings, which of course is very relevant and topical today. One is the institutional, creation of an institution, more systems, more processes, more discipline. And the other one is the geopolitical part of yours. Now, while you speak on your thoughts, but one specific question I have is that how do we marry the two? Because the geopolitical today is going through so much of disorders that institutionalizing, systemizing a geopolitical strategy, it sometimes could be very compromising, because we have to be very quick, agile. Also, there could be certain times of thing in terms of a policy formulation, some compromisation or ambiguity to the ethics part of it, because it's a policy that needs to be created. It could be many times quite ambiguous and to be changed. So how do you bring a compromisation between the two, institution and geopolitics?
Yeah, thank you, Ambarish, for that question. First of all, let me say that I completely agree with Mr. Das, and I remember his visit to IMC almost 2 decades ago to promote his first book, when he made very much the same point about the economy being closed and that creating problems as far as growth was concerned. Of course, after liberalization, you did create conditions under which firms could invest. A startup ecosystem, of course, has been developed in recent years and so on. And even though our share in terms of world trade is low, it certainly has increased over a period of time. So particularly in terms of services, for example, the kind of integration that we had with the rest of the world has been quite significant. And government, I think, on the whole, has played a very good role in terms of ensuring that there is very light regulation, especially in services. And that is what has helped us to integrate much more with the rest of the world. Manufacturing has not been so much of a success story, despite a lot of government incentives. I mean, we can go into the reasons as to why that has happened. I will not go into that now. But even though the domestic environment, I think, certainly has improved compared to what it was pre-liberalization, I think the great challenge that we face now is that the international environment has certainly turned significantly negative. And I think that is what is more concerning as far as we are concerned. Of course, there are startups that have started, there is economic growth that is happening, but if you look at attempts to integrate India with the rest of the world in terms of increasing our exports, there certainly the current geopolitical environment is turning. Certainly, I won't say hostile, but it's certainly not as good as what it used to be. And that, I think, is where the major challenges remain. I foresee two major issues. One, of course, is that countries are becoming much more closed. I mean, we've all been arguing that economies should become much more open, but because of the growing nationalist sentiment, what we are saying is countries are becoming more and more inward-looking. They are raising tariffs, they are raising restrictions on investment and so on, so that is concerning. The second problem, I think, is that when it comes to leverage in terms of negotiating with other countries and getting them to reduce their tariffs, that leverage that we seem to have is actually quite limited. So just to give a comparison with China, for example, one of the things that the Chinese have used very effectively in order to get the US to hold off on some of the tariff increases that they had, it was the fact that they had a control of critical minerals. And of course, this is something that they've been doing over decades. And because of that, they had that leverage which enabled them to get a better environment as far as tariffs was concerned. Whereas when we look at the situation that we face now, we are finding it extremely difficult to actually get a trade deal because of the fact that we don't have that leverage over other countries, particularly over the US. But also the fact that if you are really to get significant trade advantages, then it really means opening up our market in areas where there are significant concerns with regard to opening up, like agriculture, that is one. Or the other is promising huge investments, particularly in the case of the US. For example, the South Koreans and the Japanese have promised huge investments as far as the US economy is concerned in order to get their tariffs. That ability to sort of make those investments are also not there as far as we are concerned or as far as our firms are concerned. So that is, to me, is what is concerning. The domestic environment has certainly improved for investment, but the international environment has turned negative. But we seem to have very little leverage in terms of ensuring that our interests are taken care of when other countries also set their tariffs. That, to me, is a bit concerning at the moment.
Got your point. I'll come to Mr. Dash very soon with another subject of yours. But staying on the point which you made, just give me a very quick answer to that. Sometimes the international policy which we create, does that hinge upon our electoral policy also, which means to become popular to my electorates? I create an international policy which may always not be very positive, may be sometimes detrimental for our economy. As an example, posturing animosity with a country could make me popular in the country, but it could be economically detrimental. So do you think our electoral policies to become popular internally in the country also to a large extent determines our international policies?
I wouldn't say it's a desire to become electorally popular which creates issues, but it's more the realization within the government that there are certain aspects of policy which are non-negotiable, which is where I mentioned about agriculture as an area. So for example, the US has been very insistent that we open up our agricultural sector, but there are very, very good reasons why the government is extremely reluctant to open up that sector. Again, Mr. Das mentioned that there were certain reasons why countries have imposed tariffs, and we need to recognize that. So I don't think it is a question of the government saying we will not open up certain sectors in order to become popular, but it is because the government realizes that opening up would have significant negative economic implications for significant sections of our society that they don't open up. And that is certainly something that you cannot question, because those interests have to be protected, whatever may happen in the rest of the world.
Got it. You wanted to make a point on this.
Well, I think that this, look at the positive side of the yes, you've laid out the negative side of the world moving away from globalization, away from WTO, etc. But frankly, I would say that we are still the most over-regulated economy in the world. In fact, just before the session started, we were discussing with AKB here that actually the winds of deregulation are finally beginning to blow in Delhi. And this is if this can continue, and this has been forced on India, because of this situation. Similarly, I would say even agriculture. You know, the genetically modified foods, I'm sure it's a bad word in Calcutta, but the fact is that 74 countries consume GM foods, and they're in perfectly good health. In fact, Indians go to America and they don't die when they go to the US. And my point is that if the GM revolution, the scientific revolution passed us by, let's not allow the gene editing revolution, which is there today. And Indian scientists have done studies that should force us to go back to science. After all, the dwarf variety that created the green revolution was a scientific move. So what I'm trying to say is there are a lot of things that we can also do for our farmers. Now, the farm laws were partly meant for that. But look at it as a stimulus. Look at the present situation as a stimulus. There's still a lot. I mean, no country has for the last 3 years has been growing like India has grown. No major country. And so this is the time to, and you're right, I mean, it's hard. The fact is we are a democracy, but this is where we have to learn. For example, doing reforms in a democracy are difficult. But Margaret Thatcher used to say, I spend 20% of my time reforming and 80% selling the reforms. No Indian leader has sold the reforms. In fact, once, Mr. Modi had a meeting of a few people who write on economics, and he had Nainan, Swaminathan Iyer, and I was there, and he asked each of us, what should he be doing? This is soon after, 2016, I think it was. And I said, sell the market. And you know what he said? Give me a one-pager. That's the word he used, to sell the market. I gave it to him. He used it on Sunday for a Ban Ki Baat, and then he stopped. You have to do it every day. Even Deng Xiaoping was in China. He didn't have to sell the market to anybody, but he was selling it all the time. And it is to our bureaucracy that we have to sell the reform. And that today, the bureaucracy still remains the major obstacle to India's future.
Yeah, I know you have been very much a champion and a protagonist of free thoughts, more Ashoka than Arthashastriya. You have been always very much a champion of moral pluralism and all those things. But tell me one thing, when you are championing a little bit of deregulation, when you are trying to bring down institutions more for a societal upliftment to happen, in a country of around 150 crores where we have huge amount of lack of education, where we have huge amount of lack of exposure, the chances of exploiting the liberation or an institutional deregulation to a negative way is much more. In such a country, would you still be advocating the regulation should be minimized, or once when you reach that level of an education, then only it should be done?
Well, I mean, the regulation, the first principle of regulation is the principle of lightness. The regulation should be there to catch one crook and not to hurt 99% of the innocent. Unfortunately, that often happens. And that's why I was saying it's such good news that we have finally got that. And they are making some sensible moves today.
It's a regulated time buzzer. Yeah. Staying with you on your other topic of morality, you have written quite a lot and very interestingly on the morality. And even I have been discussing a couple of days back also, going back into the history of Hegel at that time, the creation of a moral corporation so that morality is not imposed, it is inbuilt in a corporation or in a society. Pluralism also, these are some of the things that should be coming up. Does it have anything to do with religion, or morality has nothing to do with religion?
No, morality preceded religion. Both Indian texts say that, and so did Plato say that. And the instinct of the moral is set in quite very early in time. There was a wonderful experiment that Piaget, the psychologist, did with 3-year-olds. He took a cake at a birthday party of 3-year-olds and he cut an exact same slice for all the 8 children who were at the birthday party. But he made one double the size and randomly gave it to one kid. And the children got angry. Some started crying. At the age of 3, they had understood the notion of fairness. Fairness is a very central idea in morality. And so in India, actually the Dharma Shastras make it, we have a textbook written by an American author on the Dharma of business. And it's really he uses the Dharma Shastras. He has interrogated the Dharma Shastras and the commentaries, medieval commentaries. And the basic principle of the difference between labh and lobh. Labh is profit and lobh is greed. And lobh is wrong and labh is okay. Somebody should have told this to Mr. Nehru when he told Mr. Tata that profit's a dirty word. And let's not talk about it before lunch. And then he moved on to show him his pandas that he got from China. And so, it's in our own society. It's not imposed through Hegel or Kant or any of the philosophers. But it's a very central dharma. The king in the Arthashastra, the king is told that dharma precedes you and you have a right to uphold dharma for the benefit of the people.
Sure.
And well, enough said.
Thank you. And last question, since we already have the buzzer warning us. For you, Biju, from an international perspective, international law, trade perspective, and taking a cue from what Mr. Das said, does morality play any role in forging out international policy and international rules, regulations, trade policies and everything?
Yeah, well, it is supposed to. So if you look at the World Trade Organization agreements, WTO agreements, multilateral trade agreements, it is essentially built on the concept of treating all nations as equal. But in reality, in terms of how it's implemented, very often, it is not implemented in that manner, and I think that is one of the major problems. So for example, if you look at international trade, one of the great concerns is that international institutions are no longer relevant as far as trade policy is concerned. The WTO has almost become irrelevant. But relating it to the point that Mr. Das was making about fairness, I think that is what is critical, whether it is international regulation or domestic regulation. So he made the point about, too much regulation. I mean, there are certain areas where certainly you need a lot of regulation. Health and safety, for example, is one. But I think what is important in order to increase investment is the belief that regulation is fair. That if I follow the regulations, I will be treated just as equally as the next person. I think the problem that's happening when it comes to enforcement of regulation, and this is where I think the problem of investment in India is coming from, regulation is seen as not being fair. Whether it's heavy or not heavy is not the issue. Is it being seen as fair? And the moment it is not seen as fair, then of course investment suffers very significantly. And that's the big problem that we are facing at the moment.
Don't give me a diplomatic answer, give me an answer straight. If we see in the world a country engaging in a kind of genocide, should we still do business with them or not do business with them? Morality or economy?
Okay, yeah, this is a tough question.
Okay.
It's like the old question of, the old answer that one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter kind of thing. I mean, there's genocide and there is genocide. Some we turn a blind eye to, because that is what real politics is all about. But should we do it? Perhaps we should not. But we need to deal with the world as it is, not as we would like it to be. That's the big problem.
Thank you, gentlemen. So what it comes out at the end from both your extremely erudite treatment of this subject is that balancing is the most critical thing. There will be ambiguity, there will be morality, there will be economic challenge, there will be economic prosperity, but amongst all these things, we have to always create a strategy of proper balancing. Thank you very much, and really
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Let's give it up for Gurcharan Das, Biju Paul Abraham and Ambarish Dasgupta to felicitate our guests. May I please invite Sudha Sadanand, Consulting Editor, TV9 Network, on stage. Thank you, everybody. For our next author session, which is Enduring Enterprises in a Volatile World, may I please call R. Gopalakrishnan. He's a distinguished business leader. He's an author and has held various leadership roles, including Executive Director at Tata Sons and Vice Chairman of Hindustan Unilever. He's known for translating boardroom wisdom into timeless leadership lessons. He's the author of The Case of
क्वालिटी पे इतना कॉन्फिडेंस, इसीलिए बिरला ऑफिस एश्योरेंस। 1 साल में पेंट को कुछ भी हुआ तो पेंटिंग वापस करके देंगे। रजिस्टर करो birlaoffice.com पर।
सामने नया सुपरमार्केट खुलने वाला है। क्या करूं कि पुराने कस्टमर भी रहें और नए भी आ जाएं?
देखो, आप दुकान के बाहर एक चाय कॉर्नर लगा सकते हो। चाय पीते पीते पुराने कस्टमर बातचीत करेंगे, उन्हें देखकर नए कस्टमर भी आएंगे और एक्स्ट्रा कमाई भी होगी।